Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Recovery After Stroke podcast. I am so grateful you're here. Before we dive into today's inspiring conversation, I want to take a moment to thank this amazing community. Your support means the world to me, and I'm thrilled to see how our podcast is connecting stroke survivors, caregivers, and allies around the world. I also wanted to remind you about my book, The Unexpected Way That a Stroke Became the Best Thing That Happened. It has been helping stroke survivors and caregivers find hope and practical guidance during challenging times. If you haven't grabbed your copy yet, you can find it on Amazon or at recoveryafterstroke.com/book. Now let's jump into today's episode. I'm excited to introduce Bruce Young, a stroke survivor with an incredible story. Bruce's stroke was caused by something you'd never expect, a dog bite. Despite the unusual cause and the challenges he faced, Bruce has turned his experience into an opportunity to inspire others and advocate for stroke survivors across Canada. In this episode, we'll explore Bruce's journey, his work in advocacy, and how he's rebuilding his life with resilience and determination. So let's get started. Bruce Young, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Tell me a little bit about what happened to you.
Well, it was the beginning of the school year in 2017, and it was Labor Day Sunday. And in our family, we had one of several dogs, and one of the sheepdog. He was a very old dog, 16 years old, and my wife and my son had said, got to be careful. He might snap at you. And so what happened was, it was time for supper, and I went and reached under his head and said, "It's time for supper," and he snapped at me. And interestingly enough, that's what ended up causing my stroke, because I have a big scratch on my nose. And it was about to start the school year, and I went to a doctor, tried to get a doctor on Labor Day Sunday. It's not an easy task. And so he just taped the skin back in place. And then when I started the school year, I was just freaking out the whole time. I couldn't keep track of what I needed to do. And my GP was, in fact, he was suggesting, he actually gave me prescriptions so I didn't have to teach certain classes. And I was getting a major headache around the back of my head. And I managed to survive through most of September. And then October 21st, I was walking around my bedroom and my son said, "Dad, you're having a stroke," which I had no knowledge that was happening. And so the next thing I know, 911, and off I go to the hospital, and they put me in critical care for neurology, and they didn't quite know at that point what had caused my stroke. And strangely enough, the emergency physician who was on was my neuro ophthalmologist, who was the one that treated me and got me up there. And at that point, for the next couple of days, they didn't know what had caused the stroke. And then what they did is they sent a sample of my blood over to the CDC. CDC is the branch of our medical system that goes and tests for COVID, etc. And they got the blood over there, and they figured out what was causing the stroke was actually a canine bacteria. So I got a canine bacteria from my dog, and then when I'm in the hospital, they did some searching in my heart, and they found a big lump of the bacteria in my heart. And what had been happening apparently is the the bacteria was being sprayed onto the back of my brain. And so they figured it all out using MRIs, and they're all set to ship me off to do some heart surgery, open me up and clean out the part of my heart that had that in. But a few hours before that, the medical staff said, well, maybe you could try an antibiotic. So I was on an antibiotic for a 6-week drip, and I didn't have to stay in, so I went home. Naturally, during that time, of course, I couldn't be teaching. So then I got through with a bunch of MRIs. They were able to figure out that the bacteria had been killed, but I still, because of the results of the stroke, I wasn't able to pull myself together to be able to teach. But believe it or not, I had no problems physically or below my neck. All of it was happening in the brain. So there are a lot of things that have stuck with me, which have prevented me from being able to do a full-time job. So I had to go on leave. I was actually on medical leave from teaching for 2 years because I'd never taken any sick days off. So I had 383 days. So I was sick for 2 years. And then because of my age, I was able to finish the sick days, and then I was able to go on to being retired.
So
And
that's quite the journey. So the stroke deficits that you have been left with, the cognitive ones, what are they? What are you not able to do that you used to do once upon a time?
well, I'm not able to. If there's a bunch of people in a room, for example, I have trouble focusing on one or two people. I have, I guess, what you would call brain fog all the time. And luckily, a friend of mine who I met, he was able to be my driver because of the stroke, I had lost 1/3 of my vision. So the neurologist said, nope, you can't drive anymore. So that took that piece out of my hands. And I guess, I get anxious very easily. So if I start to flip out on you, I'll just put a rubber mallet on my head and get me to stay in my seat.
Okay, great. What happened in October 21? So you're coming into the anniversary of that. Do you reflect on the anniversary at all? Do you think that maybe you should have done things differently? Do you have any of those types of thoughts, or do you just accept that it was one of those crazy things that happened that wasn't really your fault or anybody's fault, and 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 this is just something that you have to deal with? How do you how do you deal with it all? How do you work it out in your head?
Well, it's interesting because as I had mentioned, my wife and my son had said to me, "Don't do that, Dad," and I did. So I still hold it. I still hold myself responsible, which is very hard to accept because through my life, I've been looking back and realizing all the things that I didn't listen to other people's advice, and it's made things difficult in terms of whether it's my career or my family. So it's taken a lot of positives away from the way I can run my life.
Yeah. The dog, did it get startled, or is it just because it was old and it just, do they get grumpy? Like what was it that the dog reacted to?
Well, he didn't, he was like we talk about humans being the old grumpy guy. So he was an old dog, and he didn't want to be bothered to go get his supper because he didn't like to get up. He was pretty and probably pretty arthritic, etc. And so he was quite happy to just be lying down and not have to be getting up. And so he was taking offense to me wanting him to do something.
Let's take a quick break here. Before we continue with Bruce Young's incredible story, I want to share a little bit about how you can support this podcast. Since day one, I've personally covered the costs of producing these episodes to ensure that stroke survivors, caregivers, and their loved ones have access to resources and stroke stories that inspire and uplift. If this podcast has added value to your life, I'd love your support on Patreon by becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/recovery after stroke. You'll help me continue creating this content while joining a community that's dedicated to stroke recovery and growth. And don't forget about my book, The Unexpected Way That a Stroke Became the Best Thing That Happened. It's available on Amazon and at recoveryafterstroke.com/book, offering practical steps and motivational stories for your recovery journey. Now, let's get back to Bruce Young and hear more about how he's using his experience to support the stroke survivor community. Was he just letting you know?
Yes, exactly. And with my other two dogs, he'd snapped at them, and I think they moved back a little more quickly, so they didn't get a chance to actually break the skin on their bodies, and they had a lot of fur anyway.
Yeah.
But I think the long-term effect of all of this is that on January 2nd of this year, my wife said, we're going to try an experiment, and I want you to go live somewhere else. And, when I hear you talking, for example, about your wife's birthday and other people talking about, like it's Thanksgiving here this weekend. I don't know how much you celebrate in Australia.
Not so much.
You don't celebrate Thanksgiving?
No.
No. Anyway, it's the whole thing with you get out the turkey, etc. So it's Thanksgiving, so it's a time to be thankful for all the things that you have, and it's because it's the first year of me having to be all on my own. It's really challenging because I don't have that Thanksgiving spirit.
Okay. Now, when you mentioned going and living on your own, are you talking about a separation? What are you talking about?
Well, that's exactly it. We're not divorced at this point, but I think it's a nice situation for my wife because she has the house, and it's worked out well because I'm actually living in the condo that actually belongs to my wife and her sister, but it's a condo that my mother-in-law was living in, and she broke her hip, and my wife and her sister did not think that it would be advantageous for her to go back and live in the condo. So she's now living in a care home, and I'm living in the condo.
Okay. So life's quite different to what it was in 2017.
Yes, very much so. Yeah. But one of the things after 2 years, well, in June 2019, I had a massive seizure, and I think you suffered that as well, did you not?
I suffered something that may have been a seizure. I didn't have a massive seizure, a blackout, or anything like that, but I've had certain events that mimic that. Tell me about yours.
Anyway, I was on the phone with my wife. She was working, and we're just chatting for a few moments, and suddenly the phone went dead, and literally I had just collapsed in the house, and she immediately called 911 back to the hospital, and I was there for 4 days. And it turned out that I'd had a massive seizure. And the only thing I remember of the time in hospital was a whole bunch of very large raspberry, I guess they're raspberries or strawberries, all on like wallpaper all around the bed, the room of the hospital. So I was seeing things. And then after that, I came home, and the neurologist put me on an anti-seizure medication, which I'm still on. And that's pretty well it for medication. But as a result of me having the stroke and the seizure, and because of COVID, a lot of the organizations like the March of Dimes. You ever heard of March of Dimes?
No.
It's an organization that does provide services for people with disabilities. And one of them that they took on in a big way was people with stroke. And so we were having lots during that COVID time. We were having of sorry, lose my words a little bit. Am I in the right position?
You're perfect.
Okay. So as a result of a lot of my Zoom calls, I met people from all across Canada, and they all had the same complaint, that as soon as their time in the hospital was done, they basically were out the door, and they said, essentially, they said, God love you. And in many cases, were not given any direction as to what they could do to further their rehabilitation. And when I heard the same story over and over again, I said, well, maybe it's about time stroke survivors had an organization that could speak on behalf of us. Because like the Heart and Stroke Foundation and the March of Dimes were large organizations whose function was to provide services. And they were providing services on their behalf and not on behalf of stroke survivors. And so I formed an organization which goes right across Canada called Stroke Survivors Advocacy Group of Canada. And we now regularly meet over Zoom a couple of times a month. And we've got involved in advocating for stroke survivors, because the rules for and the protocols for stroke survivor rehabilitation are available from the Heart and Strokes Foundation. Created a whole book about what those recommendations should be, but the hospitals and the medical system are not required to implement those. So what we've been doing right now is to connect with the Minister of Health for Canada, and having chats with him and his staff about what protocols are there, and get those so that they are rules as opposed to being recommendations. So we're working along with that, and still building on getting more and more people from across the country to work with us. It's challenging to get stroke survivors, because you can't walk into a hospital and ask, well, who are your stroke survivors? There's all the whole issue of confidentiality, which kind of puts a kibosh on us being able to connect and identify people who are stroke survivors.
Right. Okay. So you're fairly busy doing things. You're doing all these things, and you still have cognitive difficulties.
Yes.
is this work that you're doing helping you with those cognitive difficulties? Is it helping you to keep going? How does it support your recovery?
Well, I would say it keeps me moving forward. And because the people I'm working with are stroke survivors, I can't simply say, well, because of my stroke, I didn't remember to do this or that, because I get a kick in the pants from other stroke survivors saying, well, you can't blame stroke survivor. You're the things that you're forgetting to do because you're a stroke survivor, which I think is a good way to connect stroke survivors, certainly across Canada. And, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to connect with you, because I'm sure there are things that are going on in Australia and certainly in other countries around the world that can support what you're doing, as well as supporting the things that we are doing in Canada.
There may be certain things. I'm not really involved in that side of recovery. I've provided some of my time as a volunteer for the Stroke Foundation here. Done a little bit of work like that, but I haven't really looked into the other things that go on around stroke. There's tons of people doing that, in
Sure.
fact, and that's okay.
Yes,
So my whole thing is like bringing stories of stroke survivors into the public
absolutely.
domain, so that other stroke survivors finding them can feel less isolated and like
Yes.
somebody else knows what they're going through and understands the situation. Um, but yeah, and I think that this stroke podcast that I'm doing here uh, helps encourage people from the stroke community to get up and do something about whatever's stopping them from accessing the type of care that they need or the type of care that other people needs. And
Well,
it's good that you reached out, and it's good that you're doing that as well on your end, because I feel like part of what you're doing is providing with some kind of a purpose.
I just met a lady. Well, I've met her online through one of the stroke Zoom calls, and she lives on Vancouver Island. And she was sharing with me. She had her stroke, and she has two daughters, 57 and 58, and they only live, a few blocks from where she lives. But they no longer will talk to her because they're saying to her, "Well, you didn't have a stroke." And just, in terms of my own situation, I'm seeing that in spades, with my wife basically saying, you didn't have a stroke, you can't blame your stroke for what's going on with you. And so that's become part of my particular commitment to the organ to stroke survivors organization, is to seek out people who are put in a position where, because of something that happened to them, it should not be, uh, people, non-stroke survivors, who are in a position where they can say and do whatever they wish and are not held accountable for their own behavior, which is very hurtful to people like yourself and me.
So you don't look like a typical stroke survivor according to them, and they can't comprehend how
Absolutely not.
this incident has caused all of the changes in the way that you are have experienced since the hospitalization and all the other things that you went through. There's kind of like a misunderstanding of what's happening to you.
Yes.
How would you say your personality has changed? Has it changed? What do you notice about yourself that's different, other than the deficits, the fatigue, uh, the the brain fog, etc.?
I don't really notice any significant changes, because I find that through my years of teaching, I feel quite capable of teaching if I were able to overcome some of the issues in terms of anxiety, etc., that I face if I were to walk into a classroom, which I know I can't do. And uh, it's been pointed out to me by my wife several times, and by a psychologist. I was doing some counseling with him, and it's interestingly, he was a psychologist that set up a program for teachers to work with their anxiety as teachers. And when he went through the sessions with me, he said, I really can't help you because you need to see somebody who's specialized in narcissism. And so that's a big label that's been put on me. And, I'm certainly pursuing online things that I can do, counseling, etc., to try to deal with that aspect of me, and learning that narcissism is not something that you can recover from. Same way, in many ways, a stroke is not something you can fully recover from. And
Is,
it's put me
is
in. Go ahead.
I was going to say, is narcissism a label they put on you now, or is it a personality trait that you've had? Is it something that's emerged? What do you think about that whole thing? Is there a difference between who you used to be and who you are? Or has perhaps the narcissism, if it was there, has that become more narcissistic?
Well, that label was put onto me a number of years before I had my stroke, and I think it's been amplified, and it's given a really solid reason for my wife to say, take a hike. And it's unfortunate because I now that I've taken on that label, I'm attempting to do something about it, but I'm not in a family or personal position to really change what has happened in terms of my family relationship.
Mhm. Okay. With the anxiety, is the anxiety a new thing that you're experiencing since the stroke, or is it something that you had to deal with previously as well?
No, I think it's been amplified. I was always the kind of person who worried about things. I was always my mother telling me I was a worrywart. So it's been something that's been with me for a long time, but it is something that certainly is more amplified and is sticking with me.
And how do you track it? How do you know that you're uh, going into a space where anxiety is becoming an issue? And what does it manifest like? And how do you settle it down?
Well, I've been taking a number of mindfulness classes, and so if I start finding that I'm getting over anxious, I will lie down and do a mindfulness session with myself. In fact, I was doing some of that before I joined you this afternoon to make sure I kept myself in order.
Yeah, you're doing a great job of delivering your message, having a conversation with me. Everything's fine, and and as a result of the things that you've learned since the stroke, has it been a little bit insightful? Have you been able to kind of get a grasp on some of those long-standing challenges that you've had your whole life that you're dealing with now? Is it kind of giving you a little bit of hope that these things are manageable?
Yeah, I think so. I would say that because of the stroke, as I said, some of those things have been amplified, and I try very hard to keep them in check. But I just got a hold of a book, and I'm just going to slip away for a second here. Apparently, this is a book that was that was written about 10, 15 years ago, and the title is Who Moved My Cheese?
Mm,
And I don't know if you've ever heard. It was written by Dr. Spencer Johnson,
I have heard of
and
it.
it's really, I'll send you a copy if you'd like.
Tell me about it.
Anyway, it's very interesting because um, it's putting four creatures into a maze, and you've got two mice, and you've got two mini humans, and there's cheese in the maze, and the the four creatures find that lump of cheese, and then over time the cheese runs out. I guess we got to go find some more cheese, and they head off somewhere. Whereas the humans say, well, we've got to find out where the cheese all went. So they intellectualize the whole thing and make it, and it's talking about change, and it's talking how humans don't adapt well to change. So for me, I think it's a very useful book, and I've found a few other books as well. I think there's this guy, Bill Graciamus. I don't think he wrote a book that has been very, very useful for me to kind of get my act together and to realize that, as you've said a little while ago, I've got a mission, and so do you. And that's why I'm so keen to work with you and to work with other organizations like the World Stroke Organization, etc., to have us create a concerted effort to provide the best services and care and recognition of people with stroke.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
Thanks for the plug. I'm doing my best. Yeah. Hey, so humans are creatures of habit, and change is something that does throw a spanner in the works. Would you have been the type of person before stroke to avoid change as much as possible? And has the change that stroke caused thrust you into this space of having to deal with something that you previously could avoid dealing with?
Absolutely. I taught in a high school for out of my I taught 25 years out of my 36 years of teaching. I taught in the same high school for a number of years, for 25 years. And during that time, there were other people in the school district who would come to me and say, well, why don't you consider doing this? Or why don't you consider, applying for this position in the district? And a lot of them were technology related because at the time I was the sort of computer guru in the school. And I said, no, I still have things to do in this school. And I think it was a primary example of me saying, no, I don't want to change. I want to stay here. And what was happening around me is that there were techie people, young techie teachers that were coming to the school and doing video production and doing lots of green screen and doing all kinds of interesting, innovative things. And then in the final year, which I couldn't teach, I was being asked to teach a couple of courses that were technology based, but I was being asked to teach a grade 11 course, which all the kids in the school had done the grade 8 level of the course. And so they knew all this stuff, and it was a lot of programming. And I was left in a position where I couldn't teach this stuff. And on top of my stroke symptoms, I had this kind of stuff happening to me. And I think, talking about this cheese here, it's really given me a kick in the pants to say, you set yourself up for the position you were in when you left teaching. And I think the stroke gave me a major kick in the pants to say, well, I should have, I should have seen this thing happening. And the stroke, in some ways, gave me an excuse not to have to change.
Hmm. Perhaps you're good at finding excuses and reasons not to have to change anyway, if you're kind of that way habituated. Um,
Yes.
if you're in a school for 3 decades and you're teaching the same thing and you're avoiding that change, is it avoiding the change? Is it because of you're comfortable? It's a thing that caused anxiety, perhaps change or learning new things or being out of your comfort zone? Why do you think that was?
Well, there was a course that was introduced provincially, and it was called Planning 10. And I was put into that class when the program started, and then 10 years later, the provincial government decided they were going to change the curriculum and they were going to introduce a similar course at the grade 11 and 12 level. And most of the stuff in the grade 10 course I found was perfect timing for kids to learn how to make a resume, how to do interviews. And by the time they got to 11 or 12, in my school in particular, the kids were all working McDonald's and working at other places. So to introduce them to writing a resume or doing an interview, they had already done it. So, and it gave me justification to be able to say, well, that was a dumb thing for them to do. And so it again gave me that opportunity to essentially say, well, I was right in the first place. Why'd you do that to me? Which of course comes back to we were talking about the fact that I got the bite in the nose, and I had been told by someone already, watch yourself.
Uh-huh.
So it's the whole thing has caused me to have a complete reflection of my life, and that's kind of where I am right now.
Yeah. It's interesting how stroke does that for a lot of people. It does make them reflect on decisions, behaviors, attitudes of the past. And they somehow seem to get an understanding that having the same approach to life after stroke just won't work. Is that where you're at? Do you see that being problematic if you were to continue to take the same path, that it's just not feasible to do that with what you're dealing with now?
You know, Nobody's really asked me that question, but you're absolutely right. And so every time I talk to yourself or talk to other stroke survivors or even family members, etc., the same question is being posed by them to me and saying, well, maybe what you need to do is instead of having Bruce 1.0 is go to Bruce 2.0. We actually had one of the stroke survivors here. He made up a little story about going from. He's also a stroke survivor, going from 1.0 to 2.0. And the way he described it is you take a piece of paper and it's smooth and flat, and then you crunch it up, and then you try to smooth it all out again. And trying to smooth it out becomes your 2.0.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to understand that you can never return to the 1.0 because there are things that you can't get all the wrinkles out of that piece of paper. And, each of these things has been an education for me to take a position that I need to do some things and I need to change in ways that I never thought I would have to.
That's a great analogy, that paper analogy. I love that because it's the same paper. It just
Yeah,
has a whole bunch more texture. on it.
If you go, I could send you the link. It's on YouTube. They made the little bit. He's made a little video of it,
Yeah, send us the
and
YouTube link and then we'll put it on the show notes so everyone else can have a look at it if they like.
yes,
So it sounds like you're embracing change now.
yes, I am. And talk to me even when you come to visit my my group in January this coming year. That you probably may notice some differences in me, and I'll probably notice them in you, and it'll be an opportunity for us to, you know, compare notes, and certainly you can have a lot of interaction and dialogue with a lot of the stroke survivors that are in my group here.
Yeah. So the change that you're making now, what have you noticed that's different about you now that you're starting to embrace change? How have you grown from that experience?
Hmm. I find it challenging to answer something like that because there are a lot of things that I didn't realize, that I still don't recognize, that are necessary for me to change in order to be able to find more cheese. And every time I get a hold of something that's been written about stroke, there's always something in it that sends me to pursue different things about myself that I didn't think I needed to be worried about changing. And I know you had an interview with, I can't remember the name of the doctor, but the one who did the Brain HQ application.
Dr. Michael Merzenich.
Yeah, and I've been religiously doing one of those exercises every night because I did it when I first. My son actually gave me the subscription to it 2 years after my stroke, and after a while, being my typical self, I said, well, now that I've got it, because I was going through them all very quickly, and then I stopped. I stopped the subscription because I think I knew it all. And now I'm going back to it and realizing I didn't know it all. And, you know, taking on my conversations with you and the book that I'm reading, the books that I've been reading, and things that are getting me to reassess myself and my new situation is really challenging, and I didn't realize the extent of it until I was shown the door in January.
Yeah. What does the cheese represent to you? So I know that in the book it talks about cheese, but what is it for you? I know it's not cheese exactly, but it
No,
represents something. What does it represent for you?
for me, like the whole thing with cheese is your relationships and so forth. And I think of the cheese represents relationships for me. In other words, I may not be able to reconcile the situation with my wife, but I've connected with an awful lot of people, and I feel a real sense of warmth, particularly the woman I talked about, whose two daughters have essentially turned their back on her, and it just gives me that, as a result of what I've been put in, as in moving into another location. I think some of these things are realizing me that there's a broader scope and perspective on people who've had stroke, and I just want to get that. I want to get that message out to my
Mm-hmm.
wife and to anyone else I can who will listen.
Mm-hmm. Does the physical move that you made into a new location, does that support your ability to change, because that's a big change in itself. Like you've gone to
Yes.
this new location, new environment, new different people around you or less people around you. There's a whole bunch of things that are different just because you've moved there. Does that support the change process?
Oh, absolutely. I think through my 43 years of being married, that there are many situations I can relay where um, people that I was working with at school or in other organizations, I would be asked to go and participate in something, and my wife would say, "No, I'm too afraid of being in groups, so we're not going to go." And that's something that happened time and time again. And I think with the separation now, I feel like I'm in a position to be able to search out those social connections that I wanted and have wanted for years. And that's ended up being a real benefit for me.
Seems like they're going to add value to your life. Oh, there's a
Do you
little
want
bit
to
of a,
pause?
oh, yeah. We'll just wait till they pass. Is that an alarm?
There's a fire station right near me.
Okay. So they're off to a job. Okay. Where were we? I forget where we were. I think we were at. Does that, well, never mind. Let's move on.
Well, you were
So
talking.
tell me, what was I talking about?
You were talking about how the move has has required me to make other changes in my life.
Mm, mm,
And I was indicating that some of the changes that I'm now able to do were things that I felt stifled to do when I was living in my house.
yeah. So
In
you're
fact,
you're going back and doing things that you never got a chance to do for many, many years, and now that's added a lot of value to your life.
yes, and believe it or not, something I've always wanted to do was to go on a boat cruise. And a friend of mine who who does the driving for me when I need to go somewhere. I walk with a walking group, and the walking group is for singles. Well, it's for people. Most of them are, divorced, or they're all basically my age. I'm in my mid 60s, and most of them are in their 70s, and most of these people, um, they've got a chunk of change in their back pocket, and they've been on cruises several times. And then 6 months ago, this friend of mine said, people have been asking if I would go on a cruise. So, beginning of February, I'm going on a cruise for the first time in my life.
That's exciting.
Yeah,
How long? How many days?
it's 14 days. It's a Caribbean cruise. So you start in Fort Lauderdale, and then you have two 7-day cruises. One cruise you go north, and the other cruise you go south. So we get to see a lot of the Caribbean by doing that.
And do those cruises stop at certain locations for you guys to get out and have a look around?
Yes, oh they do, yeah. But have to watch my pennies because all of these locations have their hand out.
Indeed, yes, that's part of the honey trap, yeah, isn't it? Isn't it's the whole point of it is to extract
Oh
money
yeah,
from the tourists.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
So, do you have to do any special kind of preparation to put yourself on a ship for 14 days in that sort of situation as a stroke survivor?
um, you see, I've come to rely on my friend who drives me because he's the one I'm sharing a cabin with.
Uh huh.
So So that makes it somewhat easier for me to deal with it. And but the only thing I've made sure of is my passport is good until December 2020. Yeah, 7 December 2022, 25. Pardon me. Keep forgetting what year it is.
Uh-huh.
So
So you're going to be supported. You're going to have somebody with you the whole time that knows you,
yes,
knows your situation. So you got you got that kind of all sorted. So that person helps you with not forgetting to get back on the ship, perhaps as well.
yeah, it's interesting. He's 10 years older than I am, and it's not like he remembers everything all the time.
Okay.
But we're going with 8 people from the walking club, and some of these people have done a lot of cruising, and they all generally, they are familiar with the fact that I forget things and leave things around. So I think they'll be helpful as well. So I'm feeling quite confident that I'm going to be looked after.
Yeah. Sounds like the community of people there to make sure that you're on the right ship at the right time.
Yes, right, for
And
sure.
what's the worst thing that can happen? You get on the wrong ship and you end up in another country, and then it's another just another adventure to get back.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to finally meet you and observe your story and hear it about the whole path. And I know we're only touching on little bits and pieces of people's stories every time we have a 1 hour interview, but it's very insightful to hear you talk about the things that you've become aware of and the things that you've implemented, the changes that you've made, the habits that you've broken, how you've done things that have been out of your depth before. Um, Even though you're quite capable, you have to be that quite a capable person to teach for the best part of 4 decades,
Yeah.
and then to still have these little bits and pieces that you need to work on just goes to show that everybody's a work in progress. Nobody works out anything
Yeah.
in their life, do they?
Yeah, exactly. The stroke survivor group, the first Zoom call we had to meet everybody and decide we were going to do this. They're all sitting in their Zoom windows, and I said, well, we need somebody to be in charge. And they literally in the Zoom call pointed at me. So I'm the president of the organization. So it's good for me because I've had to look at a variety of different personalities and to adapt to them and apply what their strengths are and to put those into effect in a variety of situations, whether they're some of them are very politically astute, particularly the ones in Ontario, and then it's kind of forced me into that position as well because we introduced in well, it'll be 2022, I guess it was, a new federal law, and it's called the Canada Disabilities Benefit. And the purpose of that law was to bring, well, it's actually the Prime Minister said it was going to bring people out of poverty, all people with disabilities out of poverty. And the person who initiated that bill is my MP, and she lives in North Delta, and she was born with a disability where she does not have a full complement of rods and cones in her eyes, so she can't see as well as everybody else. And so, and she was actually in a couple of Olympics, disability Olympics, a number of years ago. And, I've had talks with her directly. I've also had talks with the provincial uh, the provincial representative. We're actually going into an election in 2 weeks, and I sat down with my local MLA. They're called member of the Legislative Assembly, and I sat with him for a full hour. He gave me 100% of his attention when I told him the story I told you, and he was quite surprised, and he said, I'm going to make sure I can help you. I can do things that are going to support stroke survivors in Canada, well, particularly in BC, because that's his jurisdiction.
That's good work, Bruce. Definitely good work there. I hope it gets you the results, and then it gets other people the results that you're hoping for, and I think it will. And all this type of stuff can only be positive. As we get to the end of the interview, we're wrapping up now. I'd love to ask you the 3 questions that I ask my guests. And the first one being was, what's the hardest thing about stroke for you?
I think, based on my experience, it's having the people around me who are not prepared to accept the fact that I had a stroke and what the ramifications are of a stroke.
That's definitely difficult, the misunderstanding.
Yes.
And not being able to, uh, well, to convince people would be very frustrating. That would.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I know most stroke survivors go through that. They go through that to a point where they can't iterate to somebody what it's like to have a stroke and why.
Yes.
Perhaps I'm not being lazy, why fatigue is a real issue, and why I can't make in complete sentences and all that kind of stuff.
I actually work with UBC. They have a stroke behavior lab, and what they're doing is a lot of research, cognitive and physical research with stroke survivors. And I've done a lot of the research projects, and then I got on the bandwagon with them, and I wasn't going to let it lie. So, but every second day, I'm sending them another person I know of who is a stroke survivor that can be another guinea pig for them. So I'm always, as you can see, I'm always looking for opportunities, things that I can do to probably in the long run get people to acknowledge and recognize what I was saying before.
Yeah. What is something that stroke has taught you?
That you cannot that you cannot change a lot of people's opinions, and that to try to do that in a head-on direction is not something that's going to work. And I'm thinking with the people that I've been working with is if I can do it in somewhat of a roundabout way, or let people know that there is that difference between a stroke survivor and other people, and that they will in some capacity be able to acknowledge that yes, there are differences, and that others need to at least acknowledge that. But they may not change their opinions about stroke survivors, but at least I would like to see my wife say, yes, you had a stroke, and yes, there are things that you have to live with that I can't.
Yeah. All my guests have been stroke survivors or people that help stroke survivors or caregivers of stroke survivors. All the people listening are the same group of people. What would you like to tell them?
Well, it's been, every stroke support group I've been in, The comment is never stop trying. And in my case, the never stop trying is meeting with you or other people around the world or talking to other people and realizing it's not just being able to get out of a wheelchair, it's being able to get other people out of their wheelchair to make stroke something that we need to realize it is a lifelong experience. It's not something that's going to disappear. It's not something, as the neurologists say, that's going 2 years from now. Well, you've done all you can do. That's it. Off you go.
It's a lifestyle.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. I appreciate you reaching out and contacting me. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Just before we go, there was one question I wanted to ask you about the bacteria that causes stroke. Do they know the name of it? Is there a name that you recall?
No, but I could probably find out for you if you'd like.
Yeah, if it's possible, if it's a medical record about that, and you know, it'd be just. I'm not sure. Curious. I'm just curious to know what that is all about. That is such a bizarre way to have a stroke. In that,
Well, it
uh,
is.
I've met so many people who have had strokes for many different reasons and every version you can possibly imagine. But the dog bite, that's definitely a first. I've never heard of that before. And
Well, my
it's,
neurologist threw up his hands and says that doesn't happen.
yeah, yeah. It's just, it's fascinating and shocking at the same time, you know?
Yes.
Hey, Bruce, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Well, you're most welcome.
Well, that brings us to the end of this inspiring episode with Bruce Young. From his unexpected stroke caused by a dog bite to his journey of recovery and advocacy. Bruce's story is a testament to resilience, adaptability, and the power of community. If today's episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you. Please leave a comment, like, and subscribe on YouTube. And if you're listening on Spotify or iTunes, a 5-star rating or review would mean the world to me. Your feedback helps others discover the podcast and join our incredible community. Remember to check out my book, The Unexpected Way That a Stroke Became the Best Thing That Happened, on Amazon or at recoveryafterstroke.com/book. And if you'd like to support the podcast directly, you can do so at patreon.com/recoveryafterstroke. Thank you for being part of this journey. Your support and engagement keep this podcast going strong. I'll see you in the next episode.
Importantly, we present many podcasts designed to give you an insight and understanding into the experiences of other individuals. Opinions and treatment protocols discussed during any podcast are the individual's own experience, and we do not necessarily share the same opinion, nor do we recommend any treatment protocol discussed. All content on this website and any linked blog, podcast, or video material controlled this website or content is created and produced for informational purposes only and is largely based on the personal experience of Bill Gassiamis. The content is intended to complement your medical treatment and support healing. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice and should not be relied on as health advice. The information is general and may not be suitable for your personal injuries, circumstances, or health objectives. Do not use our content as a standalone resource to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease for therapeutic purposes or as a substitute for the advice of a health professional. Never delay seeking advice or disregard the advice of a medical professional, your doctor, or your rehabilitation program based on our content. If you have any questions or concerns about your health or medical condition, please seek guidance from a doctor or other medical professional. If you are experiencing a health emergency or think you might be, call 000 if in Australia, or your local emergency number immediately for emergency assistance, or go to the nearest hospital emergency department. Medical information changes constantly. While we aim to provide current, quality information in our content, we do not provide any guarantees and assume no legal liability or responsibility for the accuracy, currency, or completeness of the content. If you choose to rely on any information within our content, you do so solely at your own risk. We are careful with links we provide. However, third-party links from our website are followed at your own risk, and we are not responsible for any information you find there.